Welcome, dear horror listener. You're tuning into Horror Radio, and I'm truly grateful you're here. Whether you're a long-time listener or just stumbled upon this channel, thank you for joining me for another scary tale. If you enjoy these stories, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow and means more than you know. I'd also love to hear from you in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from, what brought you here, or even what kind of story you'd like to hear next. Your support keeps this channel going, and I appreciate each and every one of you. Now, let's get into today's horror story. I never thought a weekend away would feel so necessary until my body finally forced me to stop. For years I told myself I could manage the hours, the stress, the endless pull of work emails at midnight. I was running on empty, but I kept moving because slowing down felt like giving up. I told myself that exhaustion was proof of dedication, that stress meant I was doing something important. That lie worked, right up until my body made it clear it wouldn't hold up forever. It wasn't a dramatic collapse, nothing cinematic. It was a slow crumbling, a steady erosion of energy and clarity, until even small tasks felt like climbing uphill. I'd sit at my desk and stare the same sentence for 20 minutes, unable to remember what I was supposed to write next. I'd drive home in silence, park outside our apartment, and just sit there in the dark because I didn't have the energy to move. It was Hannah who noticed first, though I think I knew long before she said anything. She looked at me across the dinner table one night. Her fork paused halfway to her mouth and told me flat out, "You're not here anymore." She wasn't wrong. My body was in the chair across from her, but my mind was miles away, locked in spreadsheets and voicemails and imaginary arguments with clients. She didn't even sound angry, just tired, worn down from sharing her life with someone who'd been checked out for too long. That night, she asked me for something small, something I should have been able to give her without hesitation. Just one weekend, away from the noise, just us. My name's Ryan, and I agreed because part of me knew I was out of excuses. I'd been running on fumes, telling myself it would get better after the next project or once this quarter ends, but the finish line always moved further out. I told her yes. I cleared 2 days off my calendar, muted my phone notifications, and promised I'd actually let go long enough to breathe. No laptop glowing at midnight. No checking emails before brushing my teeth. Just time. Hannah found the rental. She was always better at things like that, at finding places that felt right. It was a farmhouse listed on Airbnb about an hour outside Asheville, tucked into the Blue Ridge foothills. The photos looked like something pulled straight from a lifestyle magazine. White siding, a wide porch with old rocking chairs, open fields rolling into a wall of trees. The listing mentioned it had been recently updated with modern interiors, but still kept historic charm. The host name was Margaret. She wrote in her profile that she and her husband lived in a smaller cottage further down the property, but guests had full privacy in the main house. Hannah was sold the moment she saw it. She turned the laptop toward me and grinned. "This one, look at that porch. We could sit out there all night." I didn't argue. I clicked book now. The drive from Charlotte was easy, at least at first. The highway cut through long stretches of forest and hills, traffic thinning the further we got from the city. Hannah drove, her window cracked just enough to let in the rush of cool summer air. I leaned against the passenger side door, trying to let the noise of the week bleed out of my head. Every time I felt my mind drift toward unfinished tasks, I reminded myself, this wasn't about work. This was about her, about us, about clawing back some space before there was nothing left to salvage. By the time we reached the gravel road that wound its way up toward the house, the sun was low, casting the sky in streaks of gold and pale orange. The farmhouse appeared suddenly through the trees, as if the woods had been keeping it hidden until the last second. It sat in a clearing, simple and square, the kind of house you'd draw as a kid. White siding, black shutters, a porch that wrapped around like an embrace. It looked clean, waiting, almost staged. Margaret met us on the porch. She was in her early 60s, her gray hair pulled back, wearing a plaid shirt tucked neatly into worn jeans. Her smile was warm at first glance, but her eyes had an edge to them, sharp in a way that didn't quite match the softness of her voice. Behind her stood her husband, Walt. He didn't say much. He nodded once, gave me a handshake that was firmer than I expected, and then walked off toward the smaller cottage without a word. Inside, the farmhouse was spotless. Fresh paint on the walls, polished counters, modern appliances lined up neatly in the kitchen. A basket of snacks sat waiting on the counter, granola bars, coffee pods, a handwritten welcome note. But beneath the surface shine, the bones of the house told a different story. The floors creaked under every step, long sighs groaning up from the beams below. The windows rattled faintly when the breeze touched them, like teeth chattering. Marva pointed out the bedrooms, extra blankets folded in the closet, the porch light switched by the door. Before she left, she paused in the doorway. "Nights are quiet out here," she said. "Quieter than most folks are used to. If you hear something, it's just the woods carrying sound." Her voice was soft, but the words felt like something more than courtesy. She wished us well and walked back down the path. That first night felt like relief, like maybe I hadn't been lying to myself when I said we needed this. We threw together a simple dinner, grilled cheese sandwiches, tomato soup, and ate on the porch with a bottle of wine. The cicadas rose and fell in waves, their chorus filling the dark. Hannah leaned against me, her hair brushing my shoulder, and I felt present for the first time in months. I thought, maybe this was what she meant when she said I wasn't here anymore. Later, I fell asleep faster than I had in weeks. The bed was soft, the sheets cool, and the silence pressed down like a blanket. But sometime after midnight, I woke to a sound that hollowed me out. A dragging noise across the floorboards downstairs. Slow, uneven, deliberate. I froze, my chest tightening. The sound moved, scraping, pausing, scraping again. I held my breath, straining to listen, waiting for it to continue. Then silence, just the hum of my pulse in my ears. I turned toward Hannah. She was asleep, breathing steady, her face soft in the faint glow from the hallway nightlight. I told myself it was nothing. Old houses shift and settle, boards pop, would carry sound in strange ways. I repeated that to myself until the words dulled the edge of panic. But even after it stopped, it took me over an hour to fall back asleep. In the morning, I didn't mention it. Hannah was bright, rested, already making coffee and flipping open her book. She wanted to spend the day outside, maybe walk down the ridge, maybe try the hot tub Margaret had mentioned was tucked at the edge of the tree line. I nodded, forcing myself to match her lightness. I didn't want to puncture her mood with my unease. We hiked a short trail behind the property, winding through tall grass until it narrowed into a line of trees. The forest felt heavier than I expected, the air denser, like sound didn't travel right. I kept waiting for birdsong, the rustle of small animals, even the buzz of an insect. Nothing, just silence, so deep it felt unnatural. At one point, Hannah stopped and frowned. "Do you hear that?" I looked around. "Hear what?" She tilted her head. "Exactly. Nothing. No birds, no wind. It's too quiet." She gave a small shrug, forcing a smile, and kept walking. I tried to shake it, but the silence followed me back to the house, clinging like humidity. That evening, I went out to the shed to grab kindling. Walt was there, leaning against the frame, a cigarette glowing faintly in the dusk. He nodded once. "Evening. Evening," I said, cautious. "You two settling in?" His voice was low, gravel rough. "Yeah, it's beautiful here." He exhaled smoke, his eyes cutting toward the trees. "Quiet. Real quiet. Some places they soak things in." I hesitated. "What do you mean?" He flicked the cigarette into a can at his feet and looked at me just long enough that my skin prickled. "Just saying, houses hold on to what they've heard." Then he walked off toward the cottage without another word. That night, Hannah convinced me to try the hot tub. We carried drinks out under the stars, steam curling up into the cold air. For a while it was perfect, the water warming our shoulders, the kind of stillness that felt rare, almost sacred. I wanted to memorize it. Then the lights under the water flickered. Once, twice, then they went dark. "Did you mess with the controls?" Hannah asked, her voice sharp. "No," I said, climbing out. The breaker box sat against the fence. Everything looked untouched. I flipped the switch, and the lights hummed back to life. When I turned back, Hannah's face had gone pale. She was staring at the tree line. "There was someone there," she whispered, "between those two trucks, just watching." I grabbed the flashlight and swept the beam across the woods. Nothing, just still trees, shadows layered deep. We went inside without finishing our drinks. I double-locked the door. Around midnight, I woke again. This time it wasn't dragging. It was humming. A woman's voice, soft and steady, carrying a melody I didn't recognize. It seeped through the wall near the stairs, faint but deliberate. I stood in the dark hallway, frozen, listening as my chest tightened. Then 3 knocks echoed against our bedroom door. Slow, precise. Knock, knock, knock. "Anna," I whispered. She stirred, her voice groggy. "What is it?" The knocking stopped. Silence pressed in heavy and unbroken. I swallowed and opened the door a crack. The hallway stretched out empty. Shadows pulled at the far end. But then I heard footsteps, faint, measured, descending the stairs. Then nothing. I never slept again that night. In the morning, I told Hannah everything. She didn't laugh. She didn't try to rationalize it away. She just looked at me with wide eyes and said, "I want to go home." We packed before noon, moving with quiet urgency, neither of us needing to explain. When we handed Margaret the key, she smiled too quickly, her gaze flicking toward me as though searching for something unspoken. Walt didn't appear. We left Maple Creek that afternoon, the car silent until the highway stretched open before us. Even now, I don't know what to make of it. I don't know what Walt meant about the house soaking things in, or why Margaret warned us about the woods carrying sound. I don't know if the humming was a dream, or if the knocks were real. Why to know is how it felt. It felt like the house was listening, and I can't shake the sense that some places aren't built to be shared, no matter how carefully they're staged for photos. Some are waiting for something else entirely. I never picture myself spending a summer in a place like Maple Creek. At first, the plan had been so straightforward it almost felt boring. Help my cousin Lauren settle in her new teaching job, spend a few quiet weeks away from Boston, and maybe, just maybe, use that time to clear my head after a breakup that had left me raw in ways I hadn't anticipated. I wasn't chasing reinvention, and I wasn't telling myself this would fix everything. What I wanted was something simpler. A pause. A small pocket of time where the air felt different, where I could get out of my own apartment and stop circling the same worn grooves of thought. Late one night, half awake and scrolling mindlessly through listings on my laptop, I stumbled across the one that changed everything. It stood out the moment the photos filled the screen. An Airbnb that didn't look like just a rental, but like something pulled from the kind of photograph you find tucked in a shoebox. Edges yellowed, the image soft with age. It caught me in a way I couldn't explain. My name's Alex, and I still remember the headline as clearly as if I had it in front of me. Historic countryside farmhouse, perfect for writers, artists, or those seeking peace. The pictures were both beautiful and a little haunting. A tall 2-story house with weathered white siding, a wide wraparound porch that hugged the front like open arms, ivy climbing up the porch columns. It had an old-world dignity to it, the kind of structure that seemed like it carried weight and memory. Not charming in a glossy, staged way, but something deeper, something lived in. I stared at those photos longer than I meant to. Lauren leaned over my shoulder, glanced at the listing, and without hesitation said, "That's perfect." By the next afternoon, it was booked for the month. The strangeness of Maple Creek revealed itself before we ever saw the house. The town didn't appear on most maps. You had to zoom in repeatedly on Google Earth until the name blinked into view, as though it didn't want to be found. It sat hidden in a far corner of North Carolina, tucked between miles of back roads lined with endless pine groves. Even a trip there seemed to resist being easy. The GPS lost its signal nearly 5 miles from the house, forcing us to rely on the printed directions Deborah, the host, had emailed. The road twisted through trees that grew denser the farther we went. By the time we pulled into the cracked driveway, the sun was low, sinking into the horizon, casting long shadows that stretched unnaturally across the property. Cicadas screamed from every direction, their chorus so loud it swallowed thought. I turned off the engine, and for a moment we just sat there in the car, staring. The house looked larger in person than it had online. The paint was more faded, the white dulled to gray in places. One of the porch railings sagged, leaning as though it carried the same exhaustion I felt in my bones. Still, it had that strange beauty, stubborn and upright, carrying its years. Lauren pushed open her door, stepped out, and shaded her eyes with her hand. "I love it," she said, smiling without hesitation. "It's like something out of a Southern novel." I wasn't as convinced. Something in me resisted, but I didn't say anything. We were both too tired from the drive, and the promise of shower and a bed that wasn't in transit was enough to silence my hesitation. Deborah had left the key in a rusted lockbox screwed to the siding beside the door. The metal groaned when I turned it, and inside was a single tarnished key with a tag that read simply, "Welcome." The moment we stepped in, the smell hit me. Cedar, faint but layered with something else, something older, heavier, difficult to name. The air clung to my skin as if the house had been holding its breath and released it when we arrived. The inside was a strange mix of eras. A grandfather clock stood silent in the hallway, its hands frozen at 3:12, its pendulum motionless behind the glass. The living room held a brand new sectional sofa angled toward a flat-screen TV, but against the far wall sat a worn upright piano with yellowed keys. The kitchen gleamed with modern appliances, but the floors creaked with every step, the boards groaning as though resenting the weight. Our bedrooms were upstairs. Mine overlooked the front yard and the driveway, while Lauren's faced the thick curtain of woods behind the house. We unpacked without saying much, both drained, both letting the strangeness of the house sink into us in silence. Later, after showers and an improvised dinner of sandwiches, we sat on the porch with a bottle of wine. The air was heavy with humidity, sticking to our skin. The woods behind us were a wall of blackness, the kind that swallows detail. Every so often, cicadas would fall quiet all at once, leaving a silence so complete it pressed against the eardrum before starting again. We spoke little, sipped our wine, and eventually retreated to bed. That night, I slept harder than I had in weeks. No dreams, no tossing, no interruptions, just blackness. When I woke, it was nearly noon, sunlight slipping past the curtain in wide shafts. For a moment, I lay still, disoriented by the quiet. The farmhouse carried a kind of lazy calm that felt like the rest of the world had forgotten us. Lauren had left early to meet the principal at her new school, leaving me alone with a cup of coffee and the day stretching wide before me. That was when I noticed it. The rocking chair. It sat in the corner of the porch, tucked neatly against the rail. Old, chipped, its paint flaking off and curling strips that exposed the bare wood beneath. I stopped mid-sip, staring, because I was certain it hadn't been there the night before. I'd scanned that porch. I remember the emptiness of it, the space wide enough for just the table and the 2 chairs we'd used. But now there was. Still, I told myself I must have overlooked it. Houses like this collect quirks, small details swallowed in first impressions. What unsettled me wasn't its sudden appearance, but the way it faced. Not toward the road, not toward the wide open yard, but angled directly at the line of woods, as though someone had dragged it into position to watch. I didn't sit in it. Couldn't. Instead, I spent the day inside. I pretended to tidy the kitchen, read a few chapters of book, scrolled through my phone though I had no signal. The quiet was heavy, as though the house itself pressed down on me. When Lauren returned later that afternoon, she looked almost radiant, her face flushed with relief. She dropped her bag and grinned. Everyone was so welcoming. It feels like they've been waiting for someone new. Apparently, they haven't had a new hire in years. One of the teachers even joked, "People don't move to Maple Creek. They only leave." She laughed as she said it, but the sound landed strangely, too sharp, too hollow. That night, as I moved through the house turning off lights, I checked the porch again. The rocking chair was there still, but shifted, angled differently, no longer facing the woods, now pointed squarely at the door. I stood at the window for a long time, staring, waiting for movement. Nothing, but the knot in my stomach tightened all the same. Sleep did not come easily. I tossed, stared at the ceiling, checked the time every hour until I drifted off sometime after midnight. When I woke, the clock glowed 2:13 a.m., the red numbers searing into my brain. A sound reached me through the stillness. Creaking, slow, rhythmic. I sat up, every nerve taut. My eyes shifted to the window, and through the thin curtains I could just make out the edge of the porch. The chair was moving, rocking forward, back, forward again, but no one sat in it. I pressed my face closer to the glass, searching the yard, the driveway, the woods. Everything else was still. No wind, no movement, just the steady, deliberate rocking of that chair. I told myself it was nothing. The wind, I thought, but the trees were still. My body knew better than my mind wanted to. The next morning, over coffee, I asked Lauren if she'd noticed anything odd. She hesitated before answering. Actually, yeah, I woke around 3. Thought I saw someone standing in the woods, just at the edge of the trees. They didn't move, but when I blinked, they were gone. She said like she didn't want to admit it, like voicing it might make it more real. We laughed it off, though both of us knew the laugh rang false. We leaned on the easiest excuse, our imaginations. But from that moment, the air in the house shifted. Lights flickered for no reason. Doors refused to stay shut. At night, faint music drifted through the halls. Always the same broken melody on the piano, the notes halting, uneven, like hands uncertain of where to land. Warren heard it too. Neither of us pretended not to. I began locking my bedroom door. Lauren started sleeping with her lamp on. One afternoon, as I traced the grooves in the upstairs hallway floor, my hand brushed against a board that gave more than the others. I knelt, pried it loose, and found something wedged behind it. A photograph. It was black and white, edges curled, the image blurred with age. 4 children sat at a piano, stiff in their posture, while a woman stood behind them. On the back, in faded handwriting, the words, "Miriam's class, spring 1963. One of the children's faces had been smudged out, not by ink, not by time, but by something darker, something that had bled unnaturally into the photo. That was the breaking point. We didn't wait for the month to run out. We left 3 days early, throwing our belongings into bags in the thick of night. The house groaned as we moved, the sound stretching like would under strain, as if it were aware of our departure. When we dropped the key back into the rusted lockbox, I glanced one last time at the porch. The rocking chair had shifted again, not at the door this time, back toward the woods. Lauren quit the job before the school year began. She told me she couldn't explain it, that she just didn't feel right staying. I didn't blame her. Sometimes, late at night, when I can't sleep, I still think about Maple Creek. The chair, the piano, the silence that grew heavier each day. And I wonder if some places don't want to be lived in. If they carry their past so heavily that anyone who tries to carve out a new life inside them eventually feels it pressing down, urging them, in ways subtle and unmistakable, to leave. I didn't even want to go to the wedding, if I'm being honest. It wasn't that I didn't care about Mia. She'd been a good friend during college, but it had been nearly 7 years since I'd last seen her. The invitation had come out of nowhere, a handwritten card tucked in an envelope that arrived on a rainy Tuesday. "Come celebrate with us in Pine Hollow, Montana." It read in looping cursive. I stared at it for a long time, debating whether I could politely decline. Traveling halfway across the country for a girl I hadn't spoken to in years felt strange, even forced. But one of my closest friends, Darren, got invited too, and he wasn't about to let me skip it. "Dude, it's a free weekend in the country," he'd said, grinning at me across the bar one night. "Road trip, cheap Airbnb, all the wedding wine we can drink. You need this." He wasn't wrong. I'd been dragging myself through back-to-back 60-hour weeks at my firm, barely sleeping, stress eating, and staring at the same 4 walls of my Chicago apartment. The idea of open sky and a few days away from email started to sound less like an obligation and more like relief. So I gave in. I'm Jason, and I can still picture the start of that trip. Darren's old silver Civic rattling down endless stretches of interstate, music blasting, the two of us laughing about which state had more boring scenery. By the time we finally reached Pine Hollow late Friday evening, the sun had already dipped behind the mountains. The town was tiny, like something frozen in time. One diner, a single gas station, a small bar, and weathered houses scattered across the valley. It felt untouched, like it had existed the same way for decades. Our Airbnb sat 6 miles outside of town, tucked down a dirt road that wound through empty fields and patches of forest. It was an old farmhouse, modest in its design, 2 bedrooms, wood-paneled walls, and a kitchen that smelled faintly of cinnamon when we first walked in. The place was older than it looked in the photos, but it was clean, warm, and, at least at first glance, peaceful. Darren dropped his bag by the door and stretched. "This is perfect," he said, glancing out the window toward the fields that seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. "You could disappear out here." I laughed then. If I'd known what was coming, I wouldn't have. That first night, we unpacked slowly, ordered pizza from the only place in town that delivered, and stayed up drinking cheap beer until nearly midnight. Darren crashed hard the moment his head hit the pillow, but I couldn't sleep. Something about the silence unsettled me. I'd grown up in the city, where even at 3 in the morning you could hear distant traffic or the hum of a train in the distance. Out here, there was nothing. No cars, no voices, not even the sound of wind in the trees. Just a silence that pressed down on you, heavy and absolute. I told myself I'd get used to it. Eventually, I drifted off. The next day passed quickly. The wedding was simple but beautiful, held in a small chapel on the edge of town, decorated with wildflowers. Mia looked radiant, and her family welcomed us with hugs like we were still part of their lives. The reception followed in a clearing strung with lights, with food that felt homemade and drinks that kept flowing. For a while, I forgot my hesitation about coming. By 10 that night, Darren and I were buzzing with wine and laughter as we pulled back into the long dirt driveway of the farmhouse. He yawned, muttered something about crashing, and disappeared into his room. I stayed behind in the living room, letting myself settle on the recliner with my phone, scrolling aimlessly as the house creaked around me. That's when I heard it. A knock. Soft, deliberate. Just once. I froze, my phone still in my hand. The sound had come from the front door. Slowly, I set the phone down and stood, every muscle tight. I walked to the door, peered through the peephole. Nothing, just darkness. Still uneasy, I opened the door crack and stuck my head out. The porch light flickered weakly, barely reaching the edge of the driveway. No car, no figure, only the black outline of trees in the distance. I stepped out far enough to look both ways. Nothing. The night was still, too still. I shut the door, locked it, and stood there for a moment, listening. Silence. Maybe an animal had brushed against the wood. Maybe the old house had settled. My brain tried to rationalize it, but the feeling in my gut didn't fade. I sat back down, phone in hand, but my eyes never left the window. Then came another knock, this time from the back. I shot up, the recliner snapping up right behind me. My pulse raced as I rushed to the kitchen window and flicked on the porch light. The backyard stretched out into a wide grassy slope, ending in a dark wall of trees. I pressed my face to the glass, scanning every shadow, waiting for movement. There was none. The knock had been too sharp, too intentional to be chance. But who'd be out there? We hadn't told anyone where we were staying. Even the locals wouldn't casually wander this far down an unlit dirt road at night. I told myself I'd imagined it, that I was tired, that the wine had me on edge. Eventually, I forced myself toward my room, every step heavy with unease. I don't know when I fell asleep, but I know what woke me. Another knock, this time on my bedroom door. I sat bolt upright, lungs frozen, staring at the wood. Then, before I could move, Darren's voice came from the hall, whispering, "Jason, you awake?" I got up quickly, opened the door. He stood barefoot, pale, his eyes wide. "There's someone outside," he whispered. "What?" He pointed toward his window. I heard footsteps. I looked out, and there was a man walking around the house, like he was looking for something. My stomach dropped. "Did he see you?" "I don't think so." Darren's voice shook. Then a click echoed from the front of the house. A metallic rattle. The doorknob. We turned toward the living room at the same time. The porch light glowed faintly through the glass. And there he was. A man, mid-40s maybe, wearing a long coat, his hair scruffy. His face was half hidden by the shadows, but his hand was visible, holding something thin and metallic, moving against the lock. I grabbed Darren's arm. "Call the cops." He darted back toward his room for his phone. I stayed, frozen, staring at the knob. The man jiggled it, then paused, his head tilting slightly, like he knew someone was standing just feet away on the other side. For a long moment, he didn't move. He just waited. Then, suddenly, he turned and ran. Not away, around the house. I didn't follow. Neither did Darren. We backed in the master bedroom, shoved the dresser against the door, and sat in silence, every sound magnified in the dark. The police didn't arrive for nearly 40 minutes. By then, whoever he was gone. No footprints, no vehicle tracks, nothing left behind but the echo of that deliberate knock. The officers took statements, shrugged, suggested it might have been a local who mistook the place for someone else's. We didn't believe that for a second. We left the next morning without saying goodbye to Mia's family, without stopping for breakfast in town. We drove in silence until the mountains were behind us. I still don't know who that man was or why he came, but I know this. He was out there before we noticed. Maybe the night before, maybe when we first pulled in, maybe watching, waiting. And when I lie awake now in unfamiliar places, listening to the silence press in, I can still hear it. 3 sharp knocks, echoing through the walls of that farmhouse in Pine Hollow.